Well, we are continuing our series on the book of Revelation, a chapter-by-chapter overview of God's picture book. And truly, it's not just chapter by chapter. We're going verse by verse. So there will not be a verse unread by the time we get through this. So let's just go and start off with our review of what we've been looking at so far. And again, as we go through this, we will abbreviate this review more and more so as we can get into the later chapters here. So last week we began to divide up the book of Revelation into 4 acts. And this is taken from the book I've been using with Dr. Tom Fristney, who was my former professor at Cincinnati Christian University. He wrote a book called Strength for Victory, which is his verse-by-verse commentary, and so his is one of the resources that I'm leaning very heavily on, and he was my teacher. As a matter of fact, I sat under him as he taught the class on Revelation, but he divides it into 4 acts, and so this is what we've seen so far. Act 1, Revelation 1 through 3, is understanding a relationship between Christ and the church, and so in those first chapters there, you see a glorified Jesus standing among the lampstands that represents the church, and it pictures Christ's presence in the midst of a hurting church. And then Jesus has letters sent out to 7 churches in Asia Minor, but that is also representative of all churches. The messages are things that we take from those 7 letters in those first in chapters 2 and 3. We take those today as advice and as warnings too. So it's relationship with Christ and the church. You have that. That's Act 1, and then the outline, keeping on going there. Act 2 is understanding judgment from God. So the scene changes in Revelation 4 through 11. Chapters 4 and 5, you have a vision of heaven. You have the vision of the scroll. You have a vision of the 7 seals on the scroll. And nobody can open the seals, and only the Lamb, who is the one. The Lamb is the only one who is worthy to break the seals in this picture of heaven. Of course, the Lamb is representing Christ. So in chapter 6, the Lamb breaks the 6th out of the 7 seals. The message is revealed, and these messages, these first 6 seals, as the message, are depicting the reality of suffering for Christians. And then in chapter 7, you have an interlude, a beautiful picture of heaven. And then in chapters 8 and 9, you have the opening of the 7th seal, which introduces another series of 7, which is the message of the 7 trumpets. So the opening of the seals was suffering of Christians, depicting that. The opening of the sounding of the trumpets contain messages of the action of God against the ungodly. It's the judgment of God. And so we've got that. That's and then chapters 10 and 11 contain another interlude providing encouragement for suffering Christians. In chapter 10, an angel hands John a small scroll and instructs him to eat it. The scroll was sweet to the taste, but sour to the stomach. The idea is the Christian life is a paradox. We have the sweet part of the Christian life, the sweet hour of prayer, or the grace that we have, the amazing grace we have through Christ. And then the fact that suffering is real is the sour part of living for Christ. And then you have this picture in there. That's where you had the 2 witnesses representing the faithful of the church. And these 2 witnesses are persecuted. They're killed by something called the beast from the abyss. But then the 2 witnesses come back to life after 3.5 days. And so the idea is you have a picture of an intimidating adversary, the beast from the abyss. But then you also have this idea that the suffering is temporary. And so, very quick overview here. We started Act 3 last week, understanding why there is opposition. And so this was chapter 12 we started last week. Act 3 is Revelation 12, 13, and 14. So featured in chapter 12, we had last week a picture of the woman and the dragon. So you see a picture of a woman about to give birth. This woman is being threatened by a great red dragon, and the dragon is intent on to devour her child as soon as it is born. So here's this picture. You're letting the picture just sink in and see, what do you think that it means here? By all appearances, there would be nothing to stop the dragon from accomplishing his goal of destroying the child. By all appearances, this woman, in her weakened state giving birth, is utterly defenseless. But you see that the dragon, of course representing Satan or the devil, was no match for the child protected by God, and the child is representing Jesus, the woman and the child, and they also mention the woman's offspring. It's a picture of Christ and the church, the fact that there's intimidating opposition, but there's also protection. Then we go back and we have what the movies call an origin story, where you go back and you get the background. So we travel back in time, and we're given an explanation of how this whole matter of conflict between the devil and God arose. And so you have this image of a war taking place between Michael, who is the chief angel, and the dragon, representing the devil. This war takes place in heaven. And so the dragon and his angels, they lose their place in heaven. They're thrown down to earth. And so there is a main lesson that we gain out of this. The enemy, who is constantly at war with Christ and the church, is doomed to defeat. So the enemy wants to destroy the work of God, and he never quits. He keeps coming back. He keeps coming back. You keep thinking, like you see these times where the enemy is pushed back and you think, well, that's enough. Well, he keeps coming back time and time again. But no matter how intimidating the red dragon appears, salvation, power, and authority belong to God. So, chapter 13 represents two more additional opposers to God and his people, in addition to the red dragon that we've seen here back in chapter 12. So let's move on here, and I think we can just read this. I think it is helpful to just read it in one sitting, and then we'll go back and take a look at it here. All right, Revelation 13, beginning in verse 1. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea. That was the dragon we just met in chapter 12. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast its power and its throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words. That's a key word there. Proud words and blasphemies, to exercise its authority for 42 months. We've seen that before, haven't we? It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword, by the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Verse 11, then I saw a second beast coming up out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all the people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. So there is the famous 666 passage and the beast coming out of the sea and out of the land. And so let's just see what we can make of this tonight here. So we'll begin on the outline there. The beast of the sea, verses 1 and 2. We'll look at that again. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea. That's the dragon we met in chapter 12. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns, 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like those of a lion. A dragon gave the beast its power and its throne and great authority. So, let's just break this down. A few things we see here. First of all, we see, that was verses 1 and 2. First of all, we see a beast. So, the word that's translated beast in this verse is different than the one that's used in Revelation 4. Back in Revelation 4, we saw the three. Now, the New International uses the phrase living creatures. Some of your translations might use the word beast in Revelation 4 as well, the same word, but it's different Greek words. So the word beast in this verse is different than the one that's used in Revelation 4. So the beast in Revelation 4 are best described as living creatures, and a lot of your translations have that term, but some have the word beast. The beast in Revelation 13 are untamed or savage beast. So that's a difference there. Now, then we have this description here. We have the 10 horns, the 7 heads, the crowns. So this is the idea here. You have, it's an image of presumed power and authority. Now, of course, you see the leopard and like those of a bear, mouth of a lion. That idea of presumed power and authority, it appears that this beast here is kind of acting like a poser as well. It kind of resembles what you saw in Revelation 4, but those were the beasts serving God. And these, you have the little bit of an image kind of like that, but it's a poser. He's pretending, presuming to have power and authority. And then you have blasphemous name on there included in this description. And so it's the misuse of holy things. So whatever God creates, the devil will distort. And so this is what you see here, this picture of this beast coming up. Again, get just a big picture. You see this? This is just ain't pretty. That's what you're thinking yourself. This ain't good. So to oversimplify here. So I don't know if any theologians put it like that, but that's the way I'm going to put it. Then you have the dragon we met in Revelation 12, gave the beast its power. So the two, the dragon and the beast of the sea, the two, soon to become three, they're working together. So that's the point here. These creatures, or however you want to put them, these beasts, the dragon and the two beasts, we'll see two eventually here, they're all working together. Their main stated goal is to oppose God. So you have the beast of the sea, and some more descriptions here. In the outline there, we see that his power is deceitful. All right, verse 3. One of the heads of the beast seemed, that's important, to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshiped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" So, key word here, seemed to have a fatal wound there. The creature is doomed. Although there is an outward appearance of being healed, this creature is doomed. Remember too, the beast in chapter 12 came out of the abyss. The abyss is the place of judgment. That's showing he's coming from his place, where he belongs is in the place of judgment. So it's all pointing to these are powerful, intimidating, yet doomed creatures. And how do people respond? People worshiped the dragon and the beast. Multitudes are easily taken in by the outward glitter and by the flashy nature of this beast. Would you think that this is an accurate description of just human nature? How quickly we are pulled away by false images of God. I mean, even back in the Old Testament, if you think about it, I mean, Moses was up on the mountain with the real God, in the presence of God, up on Mount Sinai. God's shaking the mountain. He's been up there. And it took 10 minutes. And the Israelites are on the foot of the mountain. And they said, he's been up there too long. 10 minutes is an exaggeration. Let's make our own God. And so they made a golden calf. How quickly it is for people to worship something that appears to be God, a God, and to be taken in by that. They are deceived. So there is no place for God in their attitude here, the people of earth here that are worshiping. So that brings us to verses 5 and 6. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place. So, draw attention to this phrase, proud words and blasphemies. That is the nature of the devil, our opposer. What was it that caused the great war in heaven? The pride of Satan. He thought that he wanted to be equal with God. He knew better than God. And so he became just filled with pride. So it's the character of Satan is to be filled with pride, and also to just be filled with blasphemies, insulting God and showing disrespect. This echoes some teachings in another place in the Bible. Paul has this teaching where he describes this mysterious idea of the man of lawlessness. And basically it's just speaking about the one who opposes God. In 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 through 4, I want to just read this to you here. It says, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose, and he will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped." That is the nature of the enemy, and anybody that is under the influence of the devil is going to try to exalt themselves and show blasphemy over anything that is God that needs to be worshipped. He sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be in the place of God, to be God. So many times the enemy does his work through charismatic leaders who are deceptive and filled with pride. An extreme example of this would have been in World War II with Hitler. They worshiped that man. They thought he was some kind of a god. They openly slander God by putting themselves in the place of God. These deceptive leaders who are filled with all kinds of pride all through history. And you'll see this time again. Probably one of the saddest examples of this would be today in modern times would be North Korea. It is just pitiful. Those poor people that are there, and just but they are forced to treat their leader like he is God. But I see this number 42 months. When I see 42 months, I see encouragement. Because when I see 42 months, for lack of, at the risk of being oversimplifying, I just say, I replace the word 42 months with temporary. Okay? So this indicates that the situation is the 42-month kind. Yep, he's blaspheming, he's having his day in the sun, but it's the 42-month kind. It's not the forever kind. So, that brings us to verse 7. The beast, it was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. So, the purpose of the sea beast was to bring hurt on the people of God. But it's the 42-month kind. So, if you see that, hopefully, my goal is that you can read through Revelation, and when you see 42, you think, okay, it's temporary. That's just the generalized thinking there. So, this brings us to the next part in our outline there, the effect of his deceitful power. So, verse 8, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. So, we have a few phrases here. This is a familiar one by now, inhabitants of the earth. That's a description of those who are in rebellion against God, as opposed to, back in chapter 6, those under the altar, as opposed to the inhabitants of the earth, those who are in heaven, those types of things. And here he contrasts that with those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. He describes the inhabitants of the earth of those whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life. In other words, those who have chosen the beast over the lamb. They have to choose. You have to choose the beast. Are you going to be deceived by the beast, or are you going to worship and follow the lamb? And then this brings us to a phrase here. We heard Jesus say this, use this phrase before, whoever has ears, let them hear. Remember him saying that in his teachings? If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. So, what's the phrase there? Whoever has ears. The reader of this book, all of us, are individually responsible for how we respond to this message. I've listened. What am I going to do with this information? Furthermore, this phrase right here, this cause calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. There, got something on your outline you want to fill in there? This phrase right here is the golden text for all overcomers, for all who seek to overcome. Again, overcoming is not about outsmarting whoever might be in government right now, or whatever dictator might be rising up. Overcoming is staying faithful to Christ while the beast is doing his work. While the beast is deceiving everyone, we overcome by not being deceived. While the beast is forcing everyone to worship him, we overcome by not worshiping the beast. And sometimes overcoming might even mean giving of our own lives. There is an Old Testament example of some people that overcame. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel. Here Nebuchadnezzar built this giant altar, or the giant statue, I should say, that people's image, that people should bow down. He blew the trumpet. Everybody was forced to bow down and do it. Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they did not do it. Now, here's the thing. We always talk about this amazing rescue they had. They were thrown into a furnace, and yet God rescued them. They came out. It was an exciting thing. But that was not when they became overcomers. You know when they became overcomers? When they told Nebuchadnezzar, God may save us and God may not. I'm paraphrasing here. God may save us or we might die. Either way, we cannot bow down to this idol. That is when they overcame. Now God rescued them, and I'm glad, and I'm sure they were glad that he did. But God rescued them, but they were overcomers when they refused to bow down to the image. We'll see an image here later on. So there's the lesson from there. So let's keep moving on. We're going to meet a new character now. We think, well, isn't that bad enough? Nope, there's another one, a beast from the earth. Great. All right. So verse 11, look here. Then I saw a second beast. I can imagine John thinking to himself, really? Here we go, another one? And maybe that's how life feels sometimes. When you're following Christ and there is one trial after another, thinking, oh my goodness, is this ever going to end? Well, yes, it's the 42-month kind. It's temporary, as bad as it might seem. So verse 11, then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. Okay, so the beast, again, the wild, untamed kind, not the living creature kind in chapter 4. Then, horns like a lamb, spoke like a dragon. So it's deceitful in nature. It's a poser. It's kind of pretending to be like the lamb in a way, but it spoke like a dragon. So you could tell. So there is the beast of the earth coming up. You've got this picture here. And then in verse 12 here, we see the power and the purpose of the second beast here, the beast of the land. Verse 12, it exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. Now you've got all three of these things, the dragon, the sea beast, and the land beast. They're all working together here. You have an evil empire, all working together, coming together, opposing the people of God. So its purpose here was simply to work against God and the people of God. So that brings us to verses 13 and 14 here. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So you've got these beasts that are kind of all working together. They're energizing each other. They're giving power and authority to each other. And so what does this beast do? It performs great signs, showing false signs of divinity. It's deceptive. This beast is a poser. Do you see? Can you think, even in today's world, or even in my lifetime, I've looked and I can think of several examples where people have fallen into deception. They have been deceived by people or organizations or whatever it might be that set themselves up as being in place of God, or being worthy of worship, or being worthy of put in place of the one true God. So they ordered them to set up an image, falsely setting itself up as an object of worship. I really do think that, to me, this reminds me of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I'm not going to bow down to that idol. Overcoming means Not necessarily I'm rescued from the furnace. They weren't rescued. Well, they were rescued from the furnace. They were still thrown in. But they overcame when they chose not to bow down. And so, again, this pointing, again, reminding us that first beast had, one had been wounded and yet lived, pointing to the truth that this beast is the doomed kind, but it's also posing, deceiving. And so this brings us to verse 15. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. So this is just not a good setup here. You've got the beast, and then you've got the image. Can you think of in our modern society where people worship just an image? They look towards just an image of something that's just, it's not real, it's not the truth, it's not the actual thing, it's just an image here. And so this false god is compelling everyone to worship. So I want to make a contrast here. You have this beast, or you have a guy like Nebuchadnezzar. He put himself in the place of God. He was to be worshipped in the Old Testament way back then. But you have this beast putting himself in the place of God, compelling people to worship. You don't worship, I'm going to kill you. You don't worship me. This is in opposition to the one true God who allows us to choose. Now God says, look, you can choose what you want to do. I set before you life and death. If you choose this way, yes, eventually you will die, but God allows us, He allows us to choose. He does not compel us. He gives us the choice of our own free will, not by compulsion or violent compulsion. But He does say, here's the results. If you follow me, you will live, you will have eternal life. If you don't, you will not have eternal life. But God, I've heard it put this way, God is a gentleman. He does not force His way into our lives. He allows us, He draws us in, and He wants us to come of our own free will. So this brings us to, so we're moving along here. See where we're at. We're verse 16 and 17. So this is where we're getting to that part where it gets kind of interesting here. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So you have the mark on the hands and on the foreheads. Now this, and I've seen this in multiple commentaries here, this is a clear reference to something called the Shema, which is an ancient Jewish prayer of allegiance to God, and it's found in the book of Deuteronomy. Let me read this to you, Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 8. So this is a prayer to God in the Old Testament. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Isn't that interesting, that picture there? So this implies, in the Old Testament, worshiping God, that you are devoting your thoughts, what's on your forehead, that's your thoughts, and your actions, what's on your hands, to God. But now, what do we see? We see this beast demanding the allegiance that belongs to God. I want you to have that mark of the beast on your forehead and on your hand. In other words, it's a symbolic way of saying demanding allegiance. Now, I will stop here and just say, sometimes we kind of wonder, like I've seen these things where people can put these chips underneath their hands and you can pay for things with that. And I want you to know, I don't think that that's necessarily what this. I think this is symbolically saying that you're going to worship this. It's not necessarily talking about some technology, but I will say this personally: I ain't getting no chip. I'll tell you that. So I won't be getting any chip. So that just creeps me out. But I'll be hedging my bets on that. Okay. So again, it's the whole idea is you need to go along with the program of the beast, or else you could not buy or sell without the mark. If you don't go along with the program, you don't go along with what the beast is selling, unless you identify with the beast, you cannot function freely in life. So go back to the dictators in life. If you did not identify with whoever that reigning dictator would be, you couldn't function freely. You had to go underground. You couldn't buy and sell freely. Christians in the early days of the church, they many times had to go underground. Even today in China, communist China, there are Christians that are going underground. They can't go around freely, and a lot of times they have to almost live their lives underground because they're not going to bow down and worship the government as if it's God, or worship that leader as if he is God. So this idea, you're not able to, unless you follow what the beast is saying to do, you can't do this. So again, overcoming is not about avoiding persecution or even death. It's about remaining loyal to God. That's what overcoming is about. That's what being triumphant is about here. So now this brings us to the one that brings about much debate and a little bit of confusion sometimes. Verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. So the word calculate means to count or to reckon, or decide by voting. The idea is you're reasoning in your mind, you're thinking about this, you're dwelling on this, you're thinking it through, you're adding it up into your mind and your heart. Now, the next line I put here, I put the number of, and I put the word I put that article in parenthesis. So if you're going back, and I guess this is originally written in the Greek language, and so we're relying on good translators and in good faith. These, we have the New International, we have, the King James. They're all done in good faith, these translations. But the original Greek does not contain an article before the word man. So a reasonable translation could be that it's the number of man. It's the number of man, just in general terms. You can look at it that way as well. That would be a very reasonable translation. So, what do we make of the number 666? Okay, so there are two approaches here that I'll present to you. Approach number one is that some people use is that the number points to an individual. Okay, so here's how this works, and perhaps you have seen this used on many different people. So Hebrew letters could also be used as numbers. They had a number identification with them. And so just like using a code or something, if you took the name Nero Caesar, that could add up to 666, or the word beast itself could add up to 666. So, and that could be done, and that is a legitimate way of kind of looking at this. Maybe in that time that's what he was doing. He was saying, add up Nero Caesar. There is a weakness, though, to this approach, because any number of names could be added up to be 666. You could get really creative. You've heard of creative accounting. You can do, and so I'll give you an example. There was a debate in Cincinnati, Ohio, between Alexander Campbell and a Catholic bishop by the name of Bishop Purcell. This was in Cincinnati in 1837. Anybody remember that? No, I'm just kidding. Campbell, now Alexander Campbell, to explain who he is, Alexander Campbell was one of the people that was foundational in starting the Churches of Christ, Christian churches, back in the early 1800s. It was the Restoration movement. He, along with others, were a part of that. And a part of this, there would be different debates, and they had this debate. He debated this man from a Catholic background, and so they were debating over having this big debate here. And so Campbell tried to argue, and I've heard this argument before, that the Catholic Church could be, you could make an argument that the Catholic Church is the beast. And so he tried this. He said, well, if you take the word the Latin kingdom, that phrase, and he made it so that it added up to 666. Okay? Well, Bishop Purcell, he was ready. And he cleverly showed that even Alexander Campbell's name, he took Alexander Campbell's name and made it add up to 666. So I think there's a weakness in trying to find and use this as a code to break in this. I remember at one time, I was kind of being goofy one time, but there was one time in our youth group, I was asked to speak about this, and I made a case how, maybe you've heard the pop singer Justin Bieber. I kind of came into it, and I made this case, and I kind of came in through the back door, and then I said of how he had this song called, it was Baby, 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 and I had and I said that those letters, that means the letter, you could correspond that with the number 6, and so I had this big argument how Justin Bieber was the mark of the beast, and so anyway, it took about 10 minutes before all the youth group realized that I was messing with them. So yes, the Hebrew letters can correspond, and Greek letters, and can correspond to numbers, but it just opens it up for so many different. Anybody can be the beast. I mean, you can add up anybody in history, any number of people. So there's another way of approaching this, and that the number approach points to a moral quality. So when I say the number 7 or the number 12 in the book of Revelation, it's usually associated with the things of God or things that are complete. Although there were some of the beasts that had 7 heads, but that was kind of in a deceptive way. So like 7 or 12 is usually associated with things that are complete or the things of God. This number is simply associated with the bad stuff, with what's bad. So an example of this, are there numbers in modern day that we just generally associate with bad stuff? Well, I could say, well, that guy's a 0. That means, so that's using a number in a negative connotation. Or that guy's an unlucky 13. Well, the number is 6. This is a really bad. So now in later weeks, we're going to look in more detail at the idea of the Antichrist. And I appreciate your patience with this because it just takes me time. I'm a little simple-minded sometimes, so it just takes me a little while to kind of get things out to where I can kind of get it in a way I can formulate the thoughts out and get that out. So we will look at that. We'll also look at the idea of the millennium and the 1,000 years, and that'll be later on when we get to Revelation 20. But so generally, from my standpoint here, it looks like this, as the way you're looking at the other numbers that are used in the book of Revelation, this 666 is just generally used as a moral, it's a kind, not an amount. It's just a moral quality. The number of the beast, understand this is real stuff, this is real opposition, it's just bad, it's the 666 kind. So, now, let's just say that we're looking back, and we could say that we could make a case that Nero was the fulfillment. They were using that, and I think that's a good case. You could say that Nero, Caesar, Nero, or that could be. You could add that up to 666, and definitely John could be pointing to Nero as opposing God and just this access of evil there, or empire of evil. But the book of Revelation is not implying that Nero would be the only fulfillment of that vision. I'll take you back, if you remember, for those of you that went through our series last year, through all of the Old Testament and the New Testament, remember when we went through the Old Testament prophets, and there was a pattern that we talked about, especially when we covered Daniel and some of the Old Testament prophets, that the Old Testament prophecies oftentimes have multiple fulfillments. And I think you can see that even here in the book of Revelation. There would be multiple fulfillments. Remember, there was a pattern we talked about in the nations. The nations, in essence, all these pagan nations, they came up, they rose up, and they became beasts when they became full of pride. And what happened to them? They rise up, they intimidate, they dominate, they demand complete allegiance, but what happens? Ultimately, they fall. And then another nation comes up, rises up, intimidates, dominates, demands total allegiance, ultimately falls. We will see in our lifetime probably another nation rise up, intimidate, dominate, demand total allegiance, ultimately fall. Right now, Russia's on the move. What are they doing? Rising up, intimidating, dominating, demanding total allegiance. Ultimately, it will fall as well. Like all earthly kingdoms, there will be one reigning kingdom forever, and that will be the kingdom of Christ.